California is an island. Not literally, of course, but geography and history has subjected the state to the same pressures and influences that make actual islands so insular. Towering mountains separate the bulk of the state from its neighbors, but America's largest desert places hundreds of miles of harsh, sparsely populated landscape between it and the more populated states farther east. Conversely, the largest, richest, and most influential cities in California all sit on the coast: San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. This is no coincidence. Granted statehood in 1850, California began its interaction with the rest of the nation by ocean. It did not border any other state. The next nearest was Texas. The interior was considered hostile, dangerous wilderness, but also just fundamentally lacked roads, so steamships would leave from the East Coast, snake through the Caribbean, and drop off passengers in Panama. There, travelers would cross the country by foot and horse and boat to get to Panama City, where they'd wait for another steamship to bring them to California. At best a 30 or 40-day trip, but incredibly, the fastest way to get from one half of America to the other. This disconnect meant California initially operated more like a colony, especially considering that until telegraph lines spanned the country a decade later, this weeks-long trip was also the fastest way to get information from coast to coast. It wasn't until the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869 that the state was truly, reliably connected to the rest of the country by land, giving California two foundational decades to define its identity in isolation. This legacy persists. The disconnect exhibits in small ways that stack up into a meaningful sum. For example, most of the rest of the country is linked by a network of oil pipelines, allowing for cheap and efficient transport of the resource from well to refinery to pump. California is different. With those towering mountains and desolate deserts separating it from the east, the economics never worked out to extend a pipeline to the state. Therefore, California largely buys crude oil from foreign countries, imports it on enormous tanker ships, and refines it locally, which, in addition to the state's strict environmental regulations, explains the higher prices typically seen at their pumps. California even has a small degree of disconnect to the rest of the American road network. It's the only state that requires all travelers to pass through any sort of border formality when driving in. It's not immigration per se, rather an agricultural inspection to check for invasive species, but the point is not that these checks themselves significantly separate the state from the rest. More so, the fact that California is able to isolate and protect itself from pests prevalent in the rest of the country with any degree of success demonstrates just how naturally disconnected it is. The only state to have a similarly extensive agricultural inspection system is Hawaii, made up of literal islands. But the reason California can be so isolated is because it's really, absurdly, filthy rich. The state's center, if defined by wealth concentration, is here, Silicon Valley. It'd be easy to assume the area's riches are overstated, but the numbers offer a quick counterpoint. Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Francisco, the three counties that encompass the core of Silicon Valley, have a collective GDP of $725 billion. This is closest to that of Poland, the 21st largest nation in the world, home to 38 million people. The uninitiated might assume that San Francisco and Silicon Valley are more or less one and the same. Sure, San Francisco has a big tech scene, but the major headquarters are distributed across the towns and cities to the south of it. Google is in Mountain View, Apple is in Cupertino, Netflix is in Los Gatos. What this means is that these titans of tech, some of the largest companies in the world, are headquartered in some rather small cities, 82,000, 60,000, and 34,000 residents respectively. Therefore, they're regulated by tiny, hyper-competitive local governments. In fact, San Francisco, the city you know best, is not even the largest city in the San Francisco Bay Area. San Jose has 983,000 residents to San Francisco's 815,000 because the entire area is just subdivided into a huge number of smaller cities and towns, which is a bit of a trend. Los Angeles County, encompassing most but not even all of the metro area, is composed of 88 different cities plus unincorporated areas. Across both of the state's largest urbanized masses, what functions like one city operates as dozens, even hundreds, leaving few comprehensive, overarching bodies to align incentives. Zoomed in, considering the odd relationship and power dynamics of neighboring communities, or zoomed out, considering the state's historical and contemporary isolation, California's as unique a state there is. Uniqueness has brought benefits, but uniqueness has also created unique problems and bizarre, sometimes convoluted means of solving them. Take homelessness. This is a hot-button, highly visible issue with complicated causes and largely theoretical solutions, so it's easy for conversations over it to spiral out of scale. A quick look at the statistics, however, makes one thing unmistakably clear. California's homelessness problem is uniquely bad. Of the 582,462 people experiencing homelessness nationwide in 2022, 171,521 were in California. That's nearly 30% of the nation's total, or for comparison, some 97,000 more than New York and some 150,000 more than Florida, the states with the second and third largest homeless populations. But California is the most populous state in the nation, so this should be considered at a per-resident rate. And here too, California outpaces the rest, with 44 people experiencing homelessness per 10,000. More troubling still, despite the highest total and the highest rate, the problem's only getting worse. From 2020 to 2022, while 23 states saw decreases in their homeless populations, California's rose by another 6%, 10,000 people. So it's a big, bad, and worsening problem, and while it's at the top of meeting agendas from small city halls all the way to Sacramento, it doesn't look like it'll be fixed anytime soon. While no state has figured out how to solve homelessness, it is generally understood that providing stable shelters and housing programs is associated with lowering numbers. It tracks then that California has comparatively little in the way of shelter beds, as the state has instead opted to prioritize permanent housing projects, which have proved expensive and incredibly slow to build. This has left more and more out in the relative cold. In 2022, 2/3 of California's homeless were considered unsheltered, living out of tents, cars, campers, or on the streets, far from shelters and services that could potentially turn things around. Now, the state government has watched this problem grow and spread and tried to think of solutions while throwing millions upon millions of dollars at it. Yet, the state has the largest, most visible homeless problem in the nation and has little in the way of solutions or even stopgaps in place to alleviate the issue. Much of this is the function of a simple reality that the state government has surprisingly little control over. It's really hard to build in California. The difficulty in finding housing extends to everyone here. The state is in the middle of a housing crisis. But this isn't because of a faltering economy or meager wages. California, year in year out, ranks as one of the highest average income states in the nation, and yet, in one analysis of 2019 numbers, once adjusted for cost of living, it plummets to 48th. Rather than unemployment or low-paying jobs, it's the sky-high cost of living that puts so many so perilously close to losing a home. All it could take is one medical emergency. Bizarrely, the explanation could be that the state's economy is too strong for its own good. Take this simple metric, the jobs housing ratio, which considers how many jobs are created in relation to how many units of housing are added to a given area. For local employment to remain healthy without adding to congestion, traffic, or displacing longtime residents, the US EPA considers a ratio ranging from 0.75 to 1.5 as healthy for an urban area. In the last decade, popular cities clearly on the rise have begun to push the upper reaches of this range. Phoenix's metro area sits at 1.34, Seattle's 1.43, Austin's 1.47, and Denver's 1.73, but California has blown the roof off this range. The LA Long Beach Anaheim metro topped 2, Riverside San Bernardino Ontario has reached 2.72, and the San Jose Sunnyvale Santa Clara ratio of new jobs per unit of housing hit a truly staggering 3.19. Of course, an unrelenting economy only accounts for the numerator here, the jobs. The denominator is just as responsible for the state's housing crisis, but this is the outcome of a concept a bit more nebulous: the California dream. Of all the floating, intangible assumptions as to what life in California is supposed to look like, the long sunny days and pleasant temperatures, along with a plethora of good jobs, beaches, and open space, it's the single-family home with a lawn and perhaps a pool that's proved the most important, the most concrete, and currently the most controversial. And it's this core tenet that's causing such massive problems. Californians, after all, desperately want to keep what they were sold on, and they're willing to fight for it. Take Atherton, a small Silicon Valley town just minutes away from Stanford. In 2022, to keep up with state mandates on housing requirements, the City Council began the process of rezoning one single-family lot to build an apartment building. The project was quickly axed. It wasn't a lack of money or a lack of municipal will. It was axed because the city's most influential, powerful executives and even basketball player Steph Curry banded together and pressured the city out of it. To them, the project would hurt their property values, cut off their views, change the character of the community, and create more traffic. So the project and its 16 units of desperately needed housing died on the vine and forced city planners back to the drawing board. While the characters might not be as high profile as those in Atherton, this happens all the time, all over the state. Here, the city government decided to designate itself as a mountain lion sanctuary, which was odd, but conveniently allowed it to forego new housing development. Here, in 2019, construction on a 154-bed shelter broke ground only for Venice Beach to sue the city of Los Angeles to halt construction. Here, residents of San Francisco's Embarcadero area did the same, suing the city over establishing a 200-bed shelter in the same neighborhood. And across the larger Bay Area, those who want California to stay the same low-density California of old have created their own organizations, councils, and committees, Better Cupertino and Palo Alto for Sensible Zoning, to name a few. This isn't just a fringe. More and more, anti-density proponents are winning local elections. All of this is, after all, in the local interest. If one small town has enough power to push the problem over to the next, clearly a constituency will opt for that over something that could damage their property values. The state has the money and the interest in solving its problems with homelessness and housing shortages, but can only do so much when powerful local governments resist even the most minor of zoning changes and the smallest of housing projects. So, unexceptional problems have grown to exceptional size, and as the unexceptional solution of simply building more housing gets rejected, the state legislature turns to the spectacular, launching projects to systematically convert motels into housing units, backing anti-NIMBY laws, and filing lawsuits against its own cities. And all of this absurd mess is confined to the issue of housing. There are, of course, fires. There's also too much water in some places and too little in others. There's spats about who deserves Colorado River water at the state level and at the local level. There's traffic, there's aging infrastructure, there's companies leaving the state and middle-class workers following them. There's a lot of bickering and a lot to bicker about. Clearly, problems have accumulated in California to an untenable level, and systematically, they aren't getting solved. Something seems fundamentally wrong with the state.